Tonight on KQED Newsroom, San Franciscans gather to protest COVID crackdowns in China while cases surge here in California. Plus, hate speech is on the rise on Twitter and more broadly. State Senator Scott Wiener joins us to discuss new hate speech targeting him and other members of the LGBTQ+ community. And we walk the pathways of a country estate where you can feel the seasons change. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, December 2nd, 2022. Hello and welcome. This is KQED Newsroom, and I'm Priya David Clemens. Believe it or not, it might be time to start getting your mask out of storage and covering up the bottom half of your face once again. Last winter, we faced the twindemic of COVID and flu cases at the same time. This year, doctors say there's a possible tripledemic of illnesses from COVID, flu, and RSV, the respiratory virus overwhelming children's hospitals. Joining us now to discuss the winter surge and how to handle holiday gatherings is Dr. Peter Chin Hong, UCSF professor and infectious disease specialist. Dr. Chin Hong, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, Priya. Thanks for having me on.
So what do you think? Should we be getting masks out, wearing them again?
It is time, I think, to bring back the masks. Unfortunately, we're not only seeing an increase in cases in the community of COVID, but test positivity is up, and most disturbingly, hospitalizations are up. More than 100% in the Bay Area, more than 65% in the state. And masks are not only good for COVID, they're good for RSV, they're good for influenza, and they're good for lots of viruses that cause the common cold.
So let's talk about the number of boosters that people have gotten, because boosters are available for COVID right now, but the latest data shows that only 16% of Californians who can get it have gotten it. When I heard these numbers going up, I ran out and got mine. Do you think more people will start to get it in the coming weeks?
I think more people are going to get it, and some of the early data from California suggests that once the cases increase and people get sick, people run out and get it. So I think that will happen. I think that there was a sense of fatigue. There was a sense that I didn't know if I needed it, and maybe it wouldn't do much more than the first two shots. But make no mistake about it, if you're older than 65 and immune compromised, getting a booster may mean the difference between life and death, not just a convenience in getting to that trip to Europe, for example.
Really?
Yes. If your immune system hasn't been reminded for a long time, particularly in that age group, death might occur. And in fact, we're seeing more than 9 out of 10 deaths right now in COVID due to not having a booster in those who are older than 65.
Okay, so great warning there. Thank you for that. Let's talk about RSV, this respiratory virus. It seems to be overwhelming children's hospitals. Orange County has declared a public health emergency. I've also seen that it is impacting seniors. What is going on with our healthcare systems here in the Bay Area? How are they responding to RSV?
So right now, the occupancy rate is amongst the highest I've seen in the pediatric hospitals. So to some pediatricians, this is their March 2020, mainly driven by RSV. 99% occupancy in UCSF Children's Hospital in San Francisco, 95% occupancy in the ICU, and 10th, not only in San Francisco, but all over the country. It's really because RSV is so insidious. It seems like a cold in most of the population, but for the very young and the very old, it can have more serious consequences. So, we have to take even what seems to be a mild cold seriously if you live with vulnerable folks.
It is the holiday season right now. People are starting to gather with family and loved ones and to travel again. Should we be doing that? Is it okay to go to large indoor gatherings?
I think it's 100% okay because we have a lot of tools right now. We can use these tools very wisely. So I think about the ABCs. A is for the air. Make sure the air is pure. Use your mask. Think about ventilation. Crack that window open. Use a HEPA filter. B is for the boosters. Get your flu shot. It can start working a few days after. It's never too late. We're expecting more and more cases to come. So if you go out and get it now, you can still be prepared. And C is for COVID testing, which is making a comeback. I had a family gathering over Thanksgiving. The host really wanted us to all get tested before. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it just adds to the layers of protection that we have.
I want to talk about a rally that happened here in San Francisco this week. Several people gathered to support those in China who are protesting the very strict crackdowns against COVID by the Chinese government. What do you think about how China has handled COVID compared to American policies? We're obviously much more open here.
Well, I think for much of the pandemic, China has really been the poster child of COVID management. If you look at the number of deaths for a country that's 1.6 billion, it's only about 5,000 compared to 1 million deaths in our country. But as the pandemic evolved, things should change. And I think seniors not very vaccinated, not as good vaccines, it's like a forest waiting to combust. And I think that's what people are fearing now with this round, and apart from the impact on the economy and personal freedom.
Are hospitals prepared? Do you think we've learned the lessons of the last few years for future outbreaks, for future contagion?
No, I think that we're not really as prepared. If you look at how we treated Mpox recently, we had all
monkeypox.
Monkeypox. We had all of the technology with PCR tests, diagnostics, and therapeutics, but yet there was a delay. So if we have a virus not yet named yet, or a pandemic not yet named, I'm afraid of the speed that we have, the lack of coordination, lack of a unified healthcare system, health information system, and the impact of misinformation. We've seen so much and heard so much about misinformation, disinformation being more untethered and more dysregulated now, and that's what is frightening me.
Where do you see that? Have you noticed that recently?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's been so much more statements that are factually and scientifically incorrect. I've never seen it as much as right now, as early in the pandemic. For a long time, there wasn't any, and then they're coming back with a vengeance right now. And, I'm getting emails, people sending me a lot of materials and quotes from Twitter and other social media that are absolutely wrong.
All right. Dr. Peter Chin Hong with UCSF, thank you for the information, the advice, and the warnings about what we might read out there on social media.
Thanks so much, Priya.
Partisan division, domestic terrorism, and hate speech have been on the rise. We have spoken about this frequently before, this change in tenor over how we communicate with each other, in person and online. The Brookings Institute recently noted a significant rise in hate speech on Twitter. In the 12 hours following Elon Musk's takeover, the Institute reports there was a 500% increase in the use of the N-word. In the weeks that have followed, there's been a rise in anti-Semitic, misogynistic, and transphobic language too. All right, so many of those tweets did come from fake accounts or bots, but not all, and they speak to the general atmosphere. Our next guest was the recent target of hate speech from members of the political far right, which resulted in death threats against him. State Senator Scott Wiener joins us here in studio now. Senator, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
So you recently wrote an editorial. You were concerned about Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, and you said it was, quote, matters tremendously. So tell me about the changes you've seen since he started running the platform.
Sure. Well, Mr. Musk has made clear that he's really not interested in moderating any kind of speech, including hate speech on Twitter. He got rid of a lot of the staff at Twitter who actually would deal with hate speech and harassment and threats. He has allowed back onto the platform various purveyors of hate speech, people like Kanye West and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others. And he has said that he's going to basically open the gates and let a whole lot of other people back on who were banned from Twitter because they engage in this kind of horrible behavior. And so we have seen an absolute uptick. I've always gotten attacked online for the work that we do, particularly around LGBTQ issues, but recently it has been like a tidal wave.
Really? And so tell us about these recent threats against you and the hate speech that you encountered.
Yeah, well, the most recent wave started when Marjorie Taylor Greene attacked me and called me a quote-unquote communist groomer. And groomer, of course, is their way of saying pedophile or if I may say it, faggot. It's a hate term against LGBTQ people, and I've been very vocal about that. So she called me a communist groomer. That started a whole swarm of hateful stuff. And then
because you're gay and Democratic and you come from San Francisco
and Jewish,
and
so
Jewish.
It's like the perfect storm for the hard right. And then the following week, this week, Charlie Kirk, who is a major MAGA right-wing online presence, went after me, just made things up, completely made things up about me, and how I'm a threat to people's children, it's almost like it's designed to trigger death threats, and we have now had 2 death threats that I'm aware of since the Charlie Kirk tweets. And I tweeted about one of those death threats, and of course the MAGA people immediately went into conspiracy theory mode and said I was making it up. These are like the Pizzagate, QAnon kind of people. So it's like this whole cycle, and it's very dangerous.
When you put yourself out in the public sphere as a public figure, you do expect some pushback.
Yeah.
What does it feel like, though, to have these comments made now?
Well, I don't mind pushback. That's democracy, and I've been in government a long time. Here in San Francisco, we're very rambunctious politically, and so a lot of people agree with what I do or don't agree. We have a lot of local fights. I don't mind any of that. I've been protested before, and I don't mind that. That's democracy. I'm an elected official, and that's part of what we deal with, and that's fine. What I do have an issue with is when people make things up, hateful things up about me, when people call me a pedophile because I'm a gay man, or a groomer, when there are threats, harassment. People have doxed me, put my home address online, which is very dangerous, and the death threats. So that's what I have an issue with.
Does it ever make you want to stop doing what you're doing?
No. I mean, if these people knew my actual personality, they would know that all that does is stiffen my resolve. I would, all the bills that I've done to support the LGBTQ community and people living with HIV, the bills that have triggered these attacks and death threats, I would do them all over again. This is righteous work to support my community. I didn't run for office to have an easy time. But with that said, it still is not the most fun thing in the world to deal with.
You're not alone in receiving hate speech. There are many others out there who unfortunately have been targeted. What's your advice for how to deal with this? Well,
one of the reasons why I'm so vocal about it, because some people say, don't talk about it. Don't talk about the threats that you get.
Don't give it more air.
Right, you're just elevating it. But I feel like I am privileged. I have a platform because I am a public figure. I do have reach. And so for every person like me who's receiving these threats and harassment and doxing, there are thousands of people who no one knows their name. They're just regular people that do not have the platform I have. And so I have a responsibility to talk about what's happening online that a lot of people who may not be as online may not see. So I feel like I have that responsibility to speak for all of these people whose lives are being upended because of this harassment. And, I think it's hard to give advice to people because when Elon Musk decides that Twitter is no longer going to moderate anything or do anything about it, there's not a lot that you can do.
We talk a lot about Musk and about Twitter. Why that particular platform so heavily? There are other social media platforms out there.
Yeah, and they all have their challenges, and I've experienced all of them. But they all, including Twitter, they all try. Twitter has stopped trying, and the thing with Twitter is, even though it's a smaller platform than Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, etc., it is very, very powerful because it is like an influencer platform for politics and media, science, and that's where it is the most efficient way of spreading information or misinformation. Much more efficient in some ways than other platforms. And what starts on Twitter doesn't stay there. It breaks out into other forms of media and into the general consciousness. And so it is a really important platform.
Are we stuck? Is this just what we all have to live with now? Do you see any path forward for our public discourse to change, for civility, for respect to be restored?
Yeah, I think there are things we can do about social media. I think there do need to be stronger legal standards so that social media platforms have a responsibility to deal with hate speech and intimidation and threats. So we, as a government, should be doing that, and we haven't done enough of that at the federal level or at the state level. In terms of the general tone of our politics, the answer is I don't know. I mean, I would love to get to a place where we could have just more, respectful, strong but respectful debates. We are in an era of a lot of division, and social media, there's a lot of amazing things coming out of social media, a lot of good in social media. But one of the downsides is it creates an incentive for people to be very strident. It creates a lot of antagonism and division and fighting going beyond just a simple debate. And so social media has poured lighter fluid on a lot of these divisions.
So just this past Sunday, you gathered with others to commemorate the 44th year anniversary, if you want to call it that, of the assassination of Harvey Milk, and also to commemorate the victims of the Club Q massacre. Tell us about that event.
Yeah, this was an eventful week. We commemorated the 44th anniversary of the assassinations of Harvey Milk and George Moscone, the Club Q victims, as well as World AIDS Day and all the people who have died of HIV. And it was a reminder of the challenges that we continue to face as an LGBTQ community, the violence against our community, the hate. Harvey Milk was murdered because of who he was as a gay man. Folks at Club Q were massacred because of who they are as LGBTQ people, and we continue to see threats and violence against our community. And so what happened 44 years ago is happening today, and we need to always remember that. It hasn't changed, unfortunately.
So you are a former lawyer and you are now a legislator. You're in a position of power. Are you going to be bringing any bills forward to try to make those restrictions stronger?
Well, we've passed a few pieces of legislation in recent years in California to put better standards on social media companies, including a few this year around children getting addicted to social media, around transparency of social media platforms' policies about how they deal with these things. So we've taken some steps. I think there's more work to do. Honestly, I wish Congress would do it. I mean, we can do the work at the state level, but it would be great to have a strong national standard.
Well, speaking of the national side of things, this week there was a step that seemed like unity, right? Democrats and Republicans coming together to pass the Respect for Marriage Act. There's still some steps for this to go through. You today spent some time at a wedding at City Hall and then spoke about this particular bill. Tell us a bit about that and what you think of this bill.
Yeah, and it was great to be with Senator Alex Padilla and with a couple that was reaffirming their vows. This is an important step. What Congress did was pass a law, or it hasn't been enacted yet or signed yet, but it will be. This what will be a law. It makes sure that if anyone gets married in one state, same-sex couple, interracial couple, that marriage must be respected and honored in all 50 states. And so that is important. That repeals a horrible law that was passed in the 90s that specifically said states don't have to recognize same-sex marriages from other states. So that's great. And it was about a quarter of the Republicans in both houses of Congress voted for it. But we do have a problem here in California where Prop 8, which bans marriage equality in California, is still in our Constitution. We need to remove it because we're worried that the Supreme Court is going to overturn marriage equality as a national right.
Okay. Let's turn to transit.
Yeah.
You spoke out this week on behalf of removing what remains of the old Central Freeway.
Yeah.
And the remains of it bisect the Mission and Bayview districts. So tell us about why you want that to be removed.
Sure. So we need to step back and remember that we didn't always have freeways going through the middle of neighborhoods and cities. That's a relatively recent thing. And when you look at the history of freeways in San Francisco, they went and bulldozed entire neighborhoods to put the freeways in. And there was actually a plan to go further, to have freeways going through the Panhandle and Golden Gate Park and Glen Canyon. Fortunately, that was stopped. That would have been a disaster for our city. And we have removed 2 freeways so far due to earthquakes, but we removed them. The Embarcadero Freeway, if people remember, there was a freeway going up the Embarcadero, blocking the ferry building from downtown.
That's right.
And then the Central Freeway went all the way up Octavia through Hayes Valley. Once we remove those, look at what's happened at the Embarcadero. The Embarcadero is amazing. It's one of the gems of San Francisco. People love it. And that only happened because we removed that freeway and opened that area up. And the same with the northern part of the Central Freeway. We now have Octavia Boulevard, which is beautiful, and all that housing that's been built there, and the parks and public space. And Hayes Valley, the reason that Hayes Valley has blossomed so much is because it doesn't have a freeway running through it anymore. So if we were to remove the other piece, the 1 mile piece of the Central Freeway going from the 80 up to Market Street, imagine what we could do with new housing and new retail and commercial areas, new parks, just a boulevard instead of a freeway. It could be transformational.
So housing is one of your other main topics that you really work on. You've long been an advocate for more dense housing.
Yeah.
Tell us about the state of California right now. Where do we stand? What needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, for 50 years, California has adopted anti-housing policies to make it hard or impossible to build enough housing. So we used to build hundreds of thousands of new homes, 200,000 or 300,000 new homes in California every year. Now we're lucky if we hit 100,000, even though we're a much bigger state. So we are short millions of homes, and that is why housing is so expensive. If you have not enough of something, it's going to be expensive. And new housing is expensive. 50 or 100-year-old housing is expensive. It's expensive to buy. It's expensive to rent. It doesn't have to be that way. And so we're trying to reverse what we've done in the last 50 years and acknowledge that housing needs to be a top priority, not a low priority, that we need to make it easier and faster to build housing. In San Francisco, it takes like 3 years to get a permit to build any kind of housing. We want to accelerate that. And so we're working locally and at the state level to make sure that we're zoning and planning for enough new housing and that we are making it easy. It should take a matter of months, not years, to get new homes approved.
And of course, the lack of housing has also exacerbated our issues with people who are unhoused, the homeless, right? And Governor Newsom recently made headlines when he denied funding to cities, homelessness funding, really. And he said, look, the plans need to be more effective. There was going to be, according to the headlines, a 2% increase in the amount of housing and reduction of people who are living on the streets. He said that's just not enough, and he's asked city leaders to come up with new plans in order for him to release that funding. What do you think about his decision to do that?
Well, I'm glad that the governor is holding cities accountable to have strong plans, that we need to move past the era of having plans that try to stop the bleeding and make things not get worse. We need to make things better. So I'm glad that the governor is focusing on that and holding cities accountable. We do need to get that money out. The cities and the counties need that money for basic homeless services, for shelter, for mental health support, and so forth. So it is getting worked out, and it will be worked out. We need to remember that the fundamental solution to homelessness is housing. We need more homes that are affordable to our lowest income residents. So many of our homeless are working. These are people who were renting, low-income renters who lost their homes and have nowhere else to go. So we need to fix the housing problem. But in the short term, we do need triage, like shelters. We need more shelter beds. We need more mental health beds, more mental health and addiction support for people, because having people living on the streets, living in tents on the streets, and of course those who are using drugs on the streets, that's not acceptable. That is harmful for them. It's harmful for the surrounding community, and we have a responsibility to create a safety net to get people off the streets.
It looks like it's going to be even worse going into 2023. There are a lot of signs that a recession is coming, and it seems like that will just throw more fuel on the fire of these problems. What are you and other state leaders doing to prepare for those economic realities? Yeah,
I mean, when you have an economic downturn, more people lose their homes because they're not working. And then also we're not creating as many new homes because the construction industry slows down. Now is the time to aggressively invest public money in creating new housing for low-income people, in providing housing subsidies so that low-income renters don't lose their homes, and in investing in solutions to homelessness. That needs to be a priority. We may have a budget deficit in California, which makes things hard, but that always needs to be one of our highest priorities.
All right. State Senator Scott Wiener, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's go now on a journey to visit a 654-acre destination of vibrant beauty, nestled along the slopes of California's coastal range. There is a massive Georgian-style mansion, plus many, many acres of manicured English Renaissance plantings. Originally constructed in 1917, this week's Something Beautiful is the Filoli Estates and Gardens, currently decorated for the holidays. Spectacular. Here's a fun fact for you. Do you remember that show from the 80s, Dynasty? Well, the opening for that show was actually shot right there at the Filoli Estates, even though the fictional show was set in Denver, Colorado. That is the end of our show for tonight. Coming up next week, we're going to be talking with San Francisco Mayor London Breed and Congressmember Jackie Speier. Send us your questions for them. You can do that by emailing us at knr@kqed.org. And you can reach me on social media at Priya D. Clemens. You can find KQED Newsroom online or on Twitter or in the PBS News app anytime. Thank you for joining us. We will see you right back here next Friday night. Have a great weekend.